We're just kind of on the back end of this property here. Still got this bedding to go through, but I'm up through these pines, and there's quite a bit of deer sign here. A lot of tracks, a lot of deer shit. So I'm walking down here, and underneath this log I can see a tine sticking up out of the snow. I have no idea what it is. I'm guessing it's not very big, but let's go look at it.
Hey everybody, Brennan here with the Breaking Point. Welcome back to another edition of the vlog. This week on the vlog, we are going to dive into shed hunting, one of my favorite things to do this time of the year. We're closing in on the end of February. We've been cooped up here for the last month. Deer season's over. Still got another month and a half for turkey season, depending where you're at. And we're starting to get stir crazy. So we're wanting to get back out in the woods. We're wanting to do something outside of the house. And this is the time of year. Deer are starting to drop their antlers. And it's a good time to start logging miles and looking for these antlers.
See, this antler's real white still here on the pedicle. And you can even see the wax ring around the outside, which usually means it's been on the ground less than a couple of weeks.
So this vlog's directed towards anybody from the person that's been shed hunting for the last 20 years or the person that's never been and is wanting to go out and try it this year. I am hopefully going to drop a little bit of knowledge on you guys. I'm sure a lot of people have found more sheds than me. A lot of people probably know a lot more about shed hunting than I do, but I am going to share some of the tips and tactics that I use year after year to be successful as a shed hunter. So the main question that a lot of people probably have is, when do I start shed hunting? And this is very controversial, and it can depend year after year, depending on the circumstances and the weather patterns, and a lot of different factors play into when you should start shed hunting. But one thing that I was taught from somebody a lot of years ago, and I've kind of always followed it, and it always seems to be pretty damn accurate, is this. And they will say that 20% of deer or 20% of bucks will lose their antlers in January, 60% will lose them in February, and 20% will lose them in March. Obviously it's not foolproof, but it's pretty accurate. I've come to notice that by the end of February, typically almost all bucks have dropped their antlers. You always have a couple stragglers holding into March, sometimes even into April. And on the other end of the spectrum, you're gonna have wounded deer, you're gonna have stressed deer that might drop early in December. Happens every year. Social media seems to make it worse every year. It seems like every year somebody's like, oh, the bucks are dropping early because they have a shed buck on trail camera in December that's lost its antlers already. And that does happen, and there's a lot of factors that play into it. But rule of thumb that I always go by is 20% in January, 60% in February, 20% in March. So having said that, when should you start looking? It really depends on where you're at, what type of property you're walking. Is it public land? Is it private land? Are there gonna be other people that are out there walking as well? If I'm walking public land, I might start shed hunting in late January, early February, depending on the weather, depending on the snowfall. But if I know there's gonna be other people looking in that area and there's gonna be continuous pressure throughout the shed antler season, I'm gonna be looking consistently all the way through, because you might get a buck that'll drop in January, and then you might get a group of bucks that drops in early February, and you might get some bucks that hold till mid to late February and even into March. And when you're getting human pressure like that, you pretty much have to be in those areas walking and picking those antlers up as they're dropping if you want to be successful. On private land, it's a totally different game. If you know for a fact that there's not going to be anybody else in there looking, there's really no sense in walking those areas until the majority of the antlers have fallen onto the ground. So for me, if I'm walking public land, I'm getting an early jump on the shed season. That's where I spend late January, early February.
The deer sign back in these beans is pretty phenomenal. It's really beat down. There's still a lot of beans, so these deer are gonna keep coming to this food. but people tracks in here too. Nobody beat me in here this morning, but it looks like somebody definitely was in here yesterday afternoon.
If I'm shed hunting on private land, I might be giving these spots until, you know, the first week in March, or the first warm up in late February, early March, when the snow's melting down and you got good visibility. That's when I'm going to go into these private land farms. There's no sense in pushing it in late January or early in February and taking a chance of running these bucks off of that farm onto another private parcel, because let's face it, deer aren't going to tolerate. It's no different than hunting season. Big deer in particular are not going to tolerate human intrusion. So if you're running into private land farms before it's, you know, before the antlers are down, you're taking a pretty big risk of those deer moving on to another property, and you might not get them back in order for them to drop their antlers on your land. Having said all that, even if you're waiting to look for the antlers in March, I cannot stress how important it is to scout in the month of February. Like I said, 60% of the antlers are going to be coming off of the deer in the month of February, which means the sign that you're seeing in March might not necessarily be where most of the antlers are laying. So if you've got, let's just say, a standing bean field that the deer are just pounding in February, but by the time March rolls around, the weather starts to warm up, the deer have switched to a green food source, alfalfa for example, and they're no longer in the beans. So you think going out there in March, all the freshest deer sign is in this alfalfa field, and you're not finding any antlers and you can't figure out what's going on. That's because the deer were in this bean field back in February when all those antlers are dropping. So even if you're not walking in February, it is very important to watch trail cameras or scout from a distance and really narrow down where these deer are spending the majority of their time feeding in the month of February, because 9 times out of 10, that's where all the antlers are gonna be. So what should you take with you when you go shed hunting? The number one item that I will not go to the woods shed hunting without is binoculars. Binoculars are going to save you a lot of steps. Anything that might look like an antler or anything that resembles an antler from a distance, I'm throwing the binocs up. 9 times out of 10 it saves me steps. So can't stress enough taking binocs to the field with you. Backpack's not a bad idea. Bring snacks, you know, bring something to drink. You're gonna need something to carry antlers in, so I always take a backpack and binocs. That's about all I take with me when I go shed hunting. So if I walk onto a property, the first and foremost thing I am looking for is I'm looking for a food source, I'm looking for bedding areas, and I'm looking for how are these deer getting from that food source to these bedding areas, transition areas, more or less. I'm gonna start, if I have a food source on the property where I can walk, I'm gonna start there. I'm gonna walk the edges of this food source. I'm gonna walk in and amongst the food, whether it's cut corn, standing corn, alfalfa, you name it. I'm gonna spend time where these deer are feeding in the month of February. I'm gonna comb the areas very thoroughly. If it's a crop field, corn, beans, whatever, I'm literally gridding this area. I'm spending a lot of time here because the deer are spending a lot of time here. If you were walking in agriculture fields, it's important. One of the big things that often gets overlooked are waterways. A lot of times when farmers plant their fields, there's going to be waterways in and amongst these fields where they don't plant, and these areas tend to have really soft grass up through the waterways, and deer, when they're out feeding throughout the night, they're gonna bed down throughout the night, and these grassy waterways are excellent spots to find sheds, because when these deer are laying down and getting up, a lot of sheds are falling in these waterways. So never overlook the waterways, grass terraces, things of that nature. On the outside of the food sources, I'm starting to walk fence rows. Anywhere that deer are jumping fences, or even if it's a electric fence, anything that makes a deer jump or do something that might jar an antler loose, I'm checking these areas. It might be a big ravine, or they might be jumping a creek bank. Anywhere where a deer has to jump and really hit the ground hard, I'm gonna check those antlers because there is a chance that, you know, a buck might pop an antler off in one of these spots. So once I get done working around the food source, I'm typically following highways back into the bedding areas. These food sources typically are gonna have very, very evident trails coming to and from them. And a lot of the times deer, especially if you get a decent snowfall that year, these deer are sticking to main highways, no different than humans jumping on an interstate in their vehicles. So once I follow these trails back into a bedding area, these deer are typically, this time of year, they're looking for exposure to the sun and they're looking to get out of the wind. A lot of the times, especially in the Midwest, the conditions can get pretty harsh in January and February, meaning we get a lot of northwest winds, and these deer are very stressed out this time of the year, so they're gonna do everything they can to stay warm and stay out of the wind. So you wanna be checking, a lot of times the south ridges or south slopes are where these deer are gonna spend a lot of their time bedding. When they head back from the food source in the morning, they're already thinking about when that sun comes up, where's it gonna be hitting and where's the wind blowing out of this day. So it's really important that any of those southern exposure hillsides, always want to check them. Certainly doesn't mean that you're not going to find sheds on north sides, because you are. There might be a day where the wind's ripping out of the southeast or the southwest, and deer aren't going to tolerate high winds like that, so they might be bedded on the north side for 2, 3, 4 day stretch. And certainly don't overlook the north facing slopes, but I always start on the south facing slopes. So when you're walking through the woods or walking in the fields or wherever you're walking, whether there's snow or no snow, a lot of people are looking for a big obvious antler just laying out in the open, or you know, they're just picturing a big 5-point side, which isn't always the case. More times than not, it's not the case. You're looking for, the majority of the deer might be 1.5 years or 2.5 years old. So you gotta really have the mindset that you're looking for small and hoping for big. So you're looking for tine tips, you're looking for bases, you're looking for anything antler related, really. You got to train your eye. You might only see 2 or 3 inches of a tine sticking out of the snow, or you might see, you know, the base sticking out of the snow or sticking behind a log or what have you. You need to be looking for parts of antlers versus entire antlers, and that is definitely going to help you be more successful. If and when you find an antler and it might be laying 20 or 30 feet ahead of you, and natural instincts are run up there, get excited, pick that antler up, start playing with it, whatnot. If you see an antler laying in front of you, I can't stress enough to slow down and be observant of the area that you're in at that time. There's a good chance that the match antler might be, you know, in that vicinity. So if there's one laying on the ground, just slow down and you might pick up 2, bang bang, just like that. Over the years of shed hunting, I've kept a pretty tight journal as far as antlers that I pick up, when I pick them up, how many match sets I have, how many miles I walk to find the sheds that I find. And an interesting fact that would come out of finding as many antlers as I have is about 1 out of 10. It's almost an exact science, at least in my journal keeping, that out of 10 antlers I find, I'm gonna find 1 match set.
Sunday morning, just woke up to a pile of snow that came down overnight. Shed hunting is officially shut down. Might not be out for a while now. That's how shed hunting goes. Mother Nature runs the whole show.
One thing to consider when you're getting into shed hunting is you pretty much have to expect the worst and hope for the best. Meaning, you might not go out in the woods and find a shed your first time out, or you might not go out the first 3, 4, 5 times out and come home with a shed. It's one of those things that in order to be successful at it, you got to spend a lot of time doing it. Miles for piles is what a lot of people say, and it really does come down to that. The more you walk, the better chance you're gonna have of finding antlers. Just to put it into perspective, like I said, I keep a pretty tight journal on all of my shed hunting. When I lived up in Wisconsin, I would average somewhere between 6 and 8 hours of walking per antler that I would find. And that's me shed hunting in areas that I've done my homework, I know deer are in, and it still comes down to about, in Wisconsin when I was up there, every 6 to 8 hours of walking, I'd pick up an antler, which gives you a pretty good idea of how many hours I spend in the woods. It's a pretty insane amount. When I moved to Iowa, my luck has gotten better. I average probably a shed in half of that amount of time of walking, but typically every weekend, like I said, sometimes starting in late January, and I will shed hunt all the way up until turkey season typically, and I'm still looking for sheds during turkey season. But every opportunity I get, whether if it's you know, I have a lunch break at work, or I get off work at a decent time and I can, you know, get in an evening shed hunt, I'm walking every chance I get. I'm putting my boots to the ground as much as possible, trying to give myself every chance I can to find antlers. So really, if you're wanting to just make a weekend out of it, go shed hunting, don't get discouraged if you don't find anything the first time you go out, because I can't tell you how many times I go shed hunting and come home empty-handed. Like I said, I'm not the best shed hunter in the woods, never gonna claim to be. It's just an activity that I thoroughly enjoy. As soon as deer season is over each year, my mind's already spinning on sheds. They can't fall off their heads soon enough. It climbs, you know, the anticipation climbs through the month of January. Once middle of February hits, I am scouting every chance I get, trying to find where these deer are spending their time. I'm walking when I can, typically public land early, moving to private land later in the month in February. Into March, I'm starting to hit my really good spots where I know nobody else has been. And shed season is really, it's a marathon. If you're gonna grind it out the entire season, it can be a marathon, because you start thinking about it in January and you're doing homework all the way through, and you're walking until turkey season for the most part. Shed hunting's about getting out in the woods this time of year. We've been cooped up all winter. No better time to get out in the woods. Temperatures are starting to warm up, the snow's starting to melt. It's just a great time to get out in the woods, and shed hunting is an excellent activity to get exercise. It's an excellent activity to scout the deer. All their sign from the fall is very evident this time of year. It's really just a great time to be in the woods. And for anybody that hasn't ever went out shed hunting, I highly encourage that you give it a try. It's about spending time in the woods, it's about getting exercise, it's about getting fresh air. So hopefully you find some time this spring to get out and shed hunt, and you might just find some antlers. Well, thanks for following along this week on the vlog. A very brief introduction into the sport of shed hunting. Hopefully you learned something. If there's any tips or tactics that I might have failed to mention this week, drop them in the comments below. Give us a thumbs up, helps us out a great deal. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, guys.